Let's paint a simple winter landscape. Waking up in Vermont, we sometimes see a view that looks something like this. When the sun comes up over the horizon, it casts some beautiful shadows on the snow. Using the sun as a light source, when the sun is low, we have a really great example of one-point perspective. The trees are all vertical lines, and their shadows that they cast all emanate from the vanishing point, which falls directly below the sun depending on where you're standing. This may sound confusing, but it's actually quite simple. Gather your materials and let's give it a try.
You will need some paper. You could use mixed media paper, or you could use a thicker watercolor paper. You will need some watercolors. I'm using this brand, Niji brand, and I'm using this top as a palette to mix some colors. You will want to use a 2B pencil, and you'll want an eraser perhaps, and a sharpener. You will also like to have a variety of brushes. You could have some round brushes, a nice fine one for your branches, and then 2 different size flat brushes. You also need some type of straight edge. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could also even be like a piece of cardboard or something, just so you can have a straight edge. And you will need masking tape.
If you're working from a sketch pad, make sure you rip it out, and then you will be taping it onto a board or your counter or a table using your masking tape. This way the paper will stay flat and you'll get a nice edge on your paper. So you want to just go ahead and grab your masking tape and tape the paper down. When you're taping it down, try to make them straight and press gently so the water doesn't seep underneath too much, but don't press too hard.
Okay, so now you want to imagine that we're going to be creating 3 separate spaces on your page, and we're going to do that by making 2 lines, one with a pencil and one with some tape. Alright, so you are going to imagine, you can just estimate 3 sections, and I think it's more interesting if they're not completely equal parts. So I'm going to make the sky, put a dot for where I want the sky to be, and then a dot for the distance of the hills in the distance, and then a dot here to show the snow. Now, just to make sure that I have it fairly straight along the horizon line, I'm going to make another dot on this side, the opposite side. You can use a ruler for that, or you can use a piece of paper. So I'm just going to measure again, lining up this edge as a right angle. I'm just going to make a line, point here and a point here. There. Now I'm going to imagine the shape of my hills in the distance. It can be any shape you want. I'm going to imagine they kind of come up and a little down. I'm not going to make them too dramatic, but just a little bit like that. I might even make a little extra little hills in the distance if I want to, going back. Yeah. Then I'm going to imagine from here to here, that's going to be the line of snow. So I'm going to use a ripped piece of tape to create that line. So I'm going to take my tape and I'm going to rip it, make sure it's long enough. That's just barely long enough. And I'm going to rip it in half. So I'm going to just try to make it as straight as possible, depending on how hilly you want your snow. I'm going to make it just a nice gentle line. You might have to try this a couple of times to get the rip right. It can be a little frustrating. And just rip, continue to rip it all the way down, like so. Then I'm going to take my piece of tape and I'm just going to put it from one side to the other. Just like that. Okay, so now I have my sky, my hills, and my snow. Now you can get your water and your brushes and your watercolors. Now I'm going to have a nice morning sky, so I'm going to look at my photograph that I have, and I'm going to imagine that it's a little bit yellow. So I'm going to make sure I have my paper towel and I have my water, and I'm going to just start sort of stirring up the paint to get some nice pigment. And then I want to have a test paper. I'm just using the paper on my table, and I'm just going to sort of test the color, see if I like it. And if it feels too wet, I want to just sop it up with my paper towel. Because you don't want to be too wet while you're working on this paper. It's not too thick, you don't want it to be too ripply, and you don't want to get too frustrated with all that water making things uncontrollable. When you're first starting to paint, it's a little easier when you can control what you're doing. You also want to be careful with watercolor because it dries so fast. You don't want to have any really crisp lines unless it's a crisp edge. Like this is going to be a crisp edge, so I'm going to leave that crisp, but I don't want this to be crisp. I want it to be blended. Now I'm going to do something that some people might say is cheating with watercolor, but I really love to use white acrylic paint. So I'm going to use my palette, and I'm just going to put in a few dollops of white, and I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to add this white, and I'm just going to kind of scrub it in. So you're just going to kind of play around with different types of marks that you can make, different ways of using the brush. You can use that scrubbing technique. You can also play around with going back and forth. I don't want my yellow to blend right in to my blue of the sky, because then it's going to look green. So I'm adding that white so it's going to look more light blue. I'm also going to add a little bit of pink to my sky. I'm going to exaggerate the color that's actually in the photograph because I just like to do that. You know me, I like a lot of bright colors. You can make it as subtle or as bright as you'd like. You can add a little orange tones if you want. And you can start thinking about the top being the darkest, where it's away from the sun. So I'm going to make a nice blue, sort of a deeper blue edge at the top of my page, and then it's going to blend down into some white and some pink. Now you can just have fun with this. There's no really right or wrong way to make a sky, so just try to have fun. When you get a little frustrated, go back to drying your brush using some of this nice white paint to mix in. You can sort of use circular motions with your brush. You can use back and forth, smoother motions. You can just start kind of playing around with your paint to create something that feels like a sky.
When you feel good about your sky, then you can start thinking about the hills and the woods in the distance.
So many different shades in there. I see lots of purple. Lately I've been noticing so much red in the hills. There's certain trees that are just sort of have these leaves that are clinging onto them that are this beautiful reddish brown. There's purple and brown, and you can You can be as inventive as you want with the color because it's really just a jumble of colors, and you can again play around with making your edge. You can make a few trees sticking up. You might want to use your pointy brush for that. You can imagine your trees are purple, or maybe they're greenish. You blend into another color of green. I'm gonna think about using some golden areas. Just really playing around with getting an overall color. What happens when I lay one color on top of another color. Just kind of have fun with it. Don't be too literal. The more colors that you lay on top of each other, the more rich it will look. I'm going to make it a little bit deeper at the base, right next to the edge of the snow. There's so much red in there. I'm just going to use some straight bits of red, sort of just starting to look a little bit like it could be autumn, so I want to tone that down. So the opposite of red is green, so I'm going to go ahead and put some green to tone that red down. Think about my edges, keep those areas of light, and then I'm going to imagine those hills in the distance maybe being a bluish color. Some light blue for the distant hills. Now, because this is a pretty experimental painting, it's really a chance for you to play with marks and lines and colors. I want you to really have fun imagining different types of marks, like what about if you use the edge of your brush, the flat brush? What about if you use your skinny brush and make some lighter lines? Make some dots. Again, don't use too much water. Keep sopping up your extra water with your paper towel. You can make the edge of the mountains have some trees sticking up. I'm going to use some more red. I really am appreciating all the red in the hills this winter. Makes me feel a little hopeful. You could imagine there's lots of tangled branches in those hills, so you can imagine making some swirly marks. What happens if you use the tip of your brush to just make some sort of swirlies and some lines? You could imagine there's some branches that have some snow on them, so you can make some kind of crazy swirly lines. You can really push that darkness at the edge. I'm going to add a little blue in there. So just keep playing with your colors, keep playing with your marks, and before you know it, you're going to have something that looks like a hill. All right. Imagining around the middle of your page, you're going to imagine a little dot. From that dot, that's where all your lines are going to be coming out. Okay? So, before we worry about making, just going to keep that dot there, and then we're going to start making our trees. Our trees are going to be vertical, so that means they're going to be parallel to the edge of the page. Okay, perpendicular to the bottom edge. Sometimes we tend to make our trees slanted, and sometimes they could be leaning, but in general they'll be going straight up and down. Okay, so you can work with your pencil and you can just draw your trees. I mean, you don't need to use the ruler, but just use it as a guide to remember you're going straight up and down. So you're going to imagine you're just make some nice lines, imagining your trees are going to be thicker at the base. You're just going to really make some very rough trees. They can be any shape that you want. We're not going to worry too much about thickness because we'll use paint for that. But we're just going to imagine trees coming straight up. It might be kind of hard to see the pencil in this video, but you're just going to imagine that you can make some of your trees kind of, sometimes they're kind of curvy. And most of you live in Vermont, so you might be able to look at a similar view outside of your own window. But I'm just going to keep imagining. Sometimes they might branch off here. They're just going to keep branching off as they come up. So there will be some going back in the distance, but I'm going to think about the ones that are sort of right at the edge of our snow. Going to keep going straight up to the trees. You can look at the image. There's going to be so many trees just going right, because they're closer than the mountains. They're going to go way high above the mountains. Once you get your basic shapes done with your pencil, now you can take a round brush. I'm using my medium brush, and I'm going to think about, you could use black or you could use brown, dark brown, it's up to you, or you could use a combination. You can check your color on your test paper. Got a little more brown, and then you can start just imagining your trees coming straight up and down.
When you finish your trees, you can gently pull off the tape and you will get the edge of your snow. Now you can imagine that some of the trees might be behind the line of snow and some of the trees might be in front of the line of snow. So you can just extend a few trees to give it a little bit more depth. You can do as many as you'd like. I did the bigger trees for the most part. And just imagine that they're just sort of scooting right in front of the snow. Using black or brown or whatever shades of brown that you'd like. Now you want to make sure the trees are dry. You can wave them a little bit. And now comes the 1-point perspective part. So remember that dot that we made? That's going to be our vanishing point. Then we're going to think about the shadows of the trees coming out from the vanishing point. So we're going to use our straight edge or a piece of cardboard or an edge of a piece of paper, and you're going to imagine that there's a line extending from each tree that's starting at the vanishing point and then coming out. So your ruler will always be touching the vanishing point and the bottom of the tree and then coming out. So don't worry about making it look like a tree yet, just sort of get the basic line and then you'll paint that afterwards. So make your pencil lines nice and light and make sure your straight edge starts at the vanishing point and then comes out all the way to the edge of the page. I like to imagine that the line is in the center of the tree because then I can make the edges of the trunk shape and the branch shape. But you can just make all the lines coming out, and already just those light pencil lines give our painting a feeling of more depth. Now you can think about what color you'd like your shadows to be. You can look at the image again, and I like to think of them as a cool blue and a little bit more purple at the base. So you can take your brush, you can use the side of your round brush and lay it down at the base of the trunk and then pull it out following your pencil lines, and then you can sort of bring out the branch shape using some sort of nice light feathery marks. You're just going to pull it out, and it's really nice to have those pencil lines as your guide. You don't want to make your lines too abrupt. You want to make them kind of light and shadowy because they're shadows. This is when your painting is really going to start to sing. I'm just pretending that there was a tree there. I just added that extra tree because I thought it would be nice to have one right in the center, right on top of the point that I made, the vanishing point. And then you can sort of add a few more branches at the top if you'd like. Add whatever touch-ups you'd like to make. Now you can imagine that the snow will be brighter as it gets closer to the sun, so it's going to be a lot more blue and shadowy as it comes away from the sun. So I'm just going to start laying down some various tones of blue and purple, leaving it brighter closer to the sun and bluer, grayer, purpler as it comes out. You can sort of soften all your edges using that sort of scrubbing technique. You can add a few extra lines if you'd like. You could just leave your snow the white of the paper, or you could use some white paint to really heighten the snow. So I'm going to go ahead and use some white paint in the snowy areas, and I'm going to highlight them with a little bit of yellow and pink. from the sunrise. So you can just go ahead and use your white. You can lighten some of the blue, soften some of the edges, add some pinks and yellows. And just remember that all the lines that you make on the snow will be going out in the direction of the 1 point perspective, where all the lines are converging eventually at that vanishing point if they were to continue.
If you'd like to, you could add a little white in the branches. There's some snow that settled in, and some of the branches, and add some of the trunks. And you feel like you've added all your last details and you're feeling happy with the way it came out, you can take off your tape. You want to just peel the tape away from your painting. Come on, slowly. A nice crisp edge.